Hello, I'm Alan, and this is podcast number 2. Thanks for listening. Now, before we start, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What if you were a participant of the FIFA World Cup? And no, not a soccer player, but a fan in the stadiums. And 2, who would you expect to see around you? Well, obvious answers are those that you want to see your fans around you, maybe friends, family, and a wider stadium filled with genders. Well, in Iran, this wasn't the case. In Iran, there's been a long-standing ban on women in Iranian stadiums, and this is basically rooted in their law and enforced by the state. There's a lot of historical evidence about this, but basically for a long time, women have been suffering discrimination, and this led to a fan, Sahar Kodayari, which is also known as the Blue Girl, and she was a huge fan of soccer. She had a passion for it, and she also had a passion for defying gender-based restrictions. So she was a passionate individual, and she stood up for something she loved. The Blue Girl incident, in Iran revolves around the tragic death of her, and she self-immolated in 2019. After she had to dress up as a guy to get into the stadium, she was facing imprisonment. And then this act of protest against the ban on women attending stadiums garnered international attention, and it sparked outrage both domestically and globally, which we'll get into a little later as well. And her self-immolation highlighted the systematic gender discrimination in Iranian sports and prompted calls for change, which we'll also get into. And then the incident underscored the ongoing struggle for gender equality in Iran and the importance of addressing issues and discrimination, mostly through sports. It all came from a place of needing something to change, wanting something to change. Now, combining all the things we talked about before with some theories that we learned from class, by examining such theories as media logic, hegemonic theory, symbolic interactionism, we can uncover the underlying structures and ideologies that shape media coverage, government policies from Iran, societal norms about Iran, mostly surrounding gender in sports. I think these theories provide valuable insights into the complexity of gender inequality in sports, and it's interesting to see how sports is used as kind of like a way for us to transport ideas through sport. And the first theory we get to is hegemonic theory. Now, this is kind of like an obvious theory, I think, that can apply to a lot of things, but it mostly explores the dynamics and dominant ideologies within society, always assuming that there's a leg up with men over women, because through history, that's kind of how it's been. In the case of the Blue Girl incident, there's a lot of norms and state norms that intersected on the ban on women in Iranian stadiums. And I think this theory can help us understand how gendered hierarchies are reinforced and contested through state, security, police, all of those things. Because one thing for it to be a law, and then it's one thing for someone to stand up to it, but you can't really stand up because there's someone always to put their foot on you. And that was really prevalent because people would get arrested, they had to dress up to get into games, they had to hide their identity, all just to go watch a soccer game. And this really sparked a lot of public discourse. By analyzing the Blue Girl incident through a hegemonic lens, we can see the ways in which gender discrimination is perpetuated and resisted within authoritarian regimes like Iran. Like I said before, it's really interesting to see how there's a long-lasting history of these rules, and just now we're getting to a change. And it took something like this to happen. And overall, hegemonic theory explores power dynamics and dominant ideologies within society, and it can be discussed throughout the episode, which we'll get to, particularly to the media coverage and kind of like the implications of everything. Another theory I want to tie into it is symbolic interactionism. This focuses on how individuals construct meanings through social interactions and symbols. And in the case of the Blue Girl incident, Her self-immolation and the blue girl symbol became a powerful symbol of resistance and martyr. This theory helps us understand how symbols are imbued with social significance and mobilize collective action. By analyzing the incident through this lens, we gain insight into the cultural meanings attached to her actions and the public's response to her death. Now, something that we're going to get into a little later, there was a lot of people that were dressing up in blue because of her, and they started a lot of hashtags, they started a lot of like artwork for her, and that was mostly seen on like Twitter, Reddit discussion forums, even in the news. But for some reason, I feel like in Western media and our media, we didn't see it as much. For example, people just carried on life. I don't even think like half my family knew what was going on. And it was probably a shock to hear that this actually happened in a World Cup. You wouldn't really expect that to happen, but because it did, now this has turned into a symbol for people to be behind. And another theory that I want to talk about is media logic. This refers to the internal process of and norms within media organizations that shape news production and dissemination. In Iran, media outlets operate with a highly restrictive environment due to the state censorship and self-censorship. A lot of journalists must navigate those constraints while balancing integrity with political considerations. So it's a really big difference compared to how media is talked about here. You could pick up a phone and start tweeting. You could start amateur journalism. You could do a lot, but back there, it's not just that everybody hates women and that they can't participate in sports and they won't have coverage. Is that there are bans and legal restrictions to even just a simple job. And I wouldn't be shocked if these kind of topics weren't even talked about there. But in the case of the Blue Girl incident, media logic influenced how her story was framed and interpreted, which highlighted the challenges of reporting on sensitive topics in authoritarian regimes. So obviously back here, Canada, the US, we can criticize a lot, and we have kind of like this outside view. But from Iran, we're going to get into a little bit of how they saw it and how the public still, I believe, is the one with the power. And kind of an intersection of all three, the Blue Girl incident combined with media logic played a crucial role in shaping the narrative surrounding of this tragic act. Media organizations in Iran operated with a highly restrictive environment. But then by examining through the lenses of media logic, hegemonic theories, symbolic interactionism, we can gain a better understanding of the complex interplay between the media representations, the power dynamics, and social meanings. So not only is this now about sports, but I could ask you what you learned about Iran and their kind of political climate. And something that we know is that sport is used to push politics and be a place for people to protest. And it genuinely should be a place to unite people. And when something like this happens, I believe sports is a pretty powerful tool that we've been examining so far. Together, these theories illuminate the structural constraints, ideological forces, and cultural symbols at play, which shape the public discourse and activism around gender in Iran, and especially about sports. Now, getting to a part where we kind of break the cycle, and this is mostly facing Iran, so there's a lot of other examples in the world where stuff still hasn't been changed, but Iran has announced a potentially groundbreaking decision which allows women to attend soccer matches in stadiums. But details are still being kind of worked out by security bodies. This mostly comes from nearly a decade of pressure from FIFA to lift the ban on women attending stadiums to watch male players. However, the instances of women being denied entry and even tear gassed by security forces, which comes from a lot of the news from Iran, like Iran International, is still an ongoing challenge. The ban has been in place for over 4 decades and has led to arrests, beatings, abuses, all against women. And despite occasional relaxations, such as allowing, women in limited numbers in October 2019, as Iran International reported, so there was a case where some women were allowed in. This has been a truly tragic death focusing around Blue Girl, which underscored more urgency and more effort to push the change. Now, FIFA was compelled to respond about the ban, and there was a lot of international outcry, grassroots activism, and threats of sanctions. So obviously there was pressure for things to change. The tragic event sparked global outrage and drew attention to the systematic gender discrimination in Iranian stadiums. On Twitter, there was things like FIFA Baniri amplified calls for FIFA to intervene and address the issue of gender inequality in sports. So on Twitter at the time, there was a lot of hashtags going on about public outcry for FIFA to change something, because FIFA is a big governing body and they have a lot of rules, and they basically intersect with a lot of governments that they work with. So if anybody could do it, they were really pushing them to. Obviously, the threat of the sanctions from FIFA added further pressure for them to actually make change, but this combined with public outcry prompted FIFA to address the situation publicly and call for an end on the ban. Now, further making change, you can see here on the screen that from Twitter, Iranian females chant the Blue Girl at Tehran's Azadi Stadium to commemorate Sahar Kodiari, the fan which committed self-immolation in 2019 after she was arrested and sentenced to jail for attempting to enter the stadium. So you can see now there was a lot of protests, there was a lot of people dressing in blue showing up to stadiums. And then for the first time, when you look at to the right, for the first time since 1979, around 500 Iranian women have been allowed to watch a club football match at the stadium under FIFA's pressure. So basically you can see that things are changing and people are being allowed in. And something that I didn't add here, but which was kind of like talked about on Reddit discussion, Twitter discussion, just like news articles, a lot of people were saying that, hey, if you go and support, if you show up to a stadium, now her blood is on your hands. But obviously, as you can see, the fans here, I don't believe that the blood is on their hands. It's mostly something that they were working to push past, and I think that's kind of why this whole situation happened. Similar to the start with the monk. And then, thank you for listening and watching. This kind of concludes the topic about Blue Girl. Now, despite some progress, which we talked about, including FIFA's efforts to pressure Iran to lift the ban, challenges still persist, and the right of women to freely participate is still contested. The global outcry and activism surrounding these events highlighted the importance of our continued advocacy and to put pressure on governing bodies like FIFA to actually make change. Now, before we end it, as we reflect on the events of Iran, what more could be done to ensure that women around the world have equal access to sporting events and opportunities to prevent something like this happening? How could international organizations, governments, and civil society work together to dismantle the barriers? And something that I also was really interested by is, can we use sport as a tool that unites us to overcome global pressures even more? So if there's a situation where politics aren't going well, can sport and governing bodies actually be a way to push that narrative? Overall, thanks for listening. See you later.